Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that the next edition of Frontier magazine is out. And if you haven't seen these, they are beautiful. They have great artwork, they have a great layout, they're full of interesting columns from some of your favorite conservative thinkers. So if you want to pick up a copy of Frontier magazine, you have to be part of Blaze Unlimited. You can go to blazeunlimited.com/Auron right now and lock in your subscription before we sell out of these magazines. In fact, the first 50 subscribers who use the code BLAZE50 will get $40 off and receive a special bonus, which is digital access to Frontier issues 1 and 2. So you'll have the whole set. That's blazeunlimited.com/Auron. Use the promo code BLAZE50 today. All right, guys. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about neoconservatives and Russell Kirk. Russell Kirk, of course, famously wrote The Conservative Mind. He's one of the most important conservative intellectuals of easily the last 50, 70 some odd years. And he is a critical touchstone for many people of the last few generations who got into political theory or wanted to have a deeper understanding of conservatism. However, he also was somebody who ended up being breaking from the mainstream conservative movement. He actually became a paleo conservative, helped Pat Buchanan in his run against George H. Bush. And so this is somebody who, while he was central to the original conservative movement, was his own man and said some things that eventually pushed him out of the good graces of the conservative movement. One of the key things that he did to kind of lose favor with a lot of mainstream conservatives was to give this speech at the Heritage Foundation talking about neoconservatism. He was not a fan of neoconservatism. He thought it was a stain on the conservative movement, and he wrote an entire speech about this and delivered it at the Heritage Foundation. Now, this was obviously not a very popular move in 1988 when neoconservatism was most assuredly in full swing. So I wanted to read this today because I just think it's a very good speech, and I think it doesn't get enough attention. Obviously, in addition to just being a brilliant guy, Kirk goes hard on the neoconservative movement and its shortcomings, and he does not pull punches. This guy was canceled on the right for all the reasons you expect. So I want to dive into the substance of the speech. And normally when we do these readings, I'm giving a lot of commentary along with the reading itself. But honestly, in this one, I won't do as much because A, the speech is long and I want to get through all of it. And B, Kirk is just very good at laying out exactly what he means. So I'll do some commentary, some decoding here. But really, I think this is just worth going through together. Now, you can't find, as far as I'm aware, a video of him delivering the speech. And the archived document, as you can see, it says at the top here, has errors. The way even it's just formatted. Obviously, this is not something that I guess they want everyone having out there. I don't know, or they just couldn't be bothered to kind of put it in better formatting because it's not something that maybe they want to be pushing. But bear with me. We will get through the whole thing, even though there are a few errors in it here or there. All right, so let's get started with the speech here. Of course, this is Russell Kirk. He's delivering this in 1988. So let's begin. There stands before you, ladies and gentlemen, one of the few survivors of the original intrepid band of neoconservatives. Very early in the 1950s, some of us who declared our belief in the permanent things were so denominated by our adversaries, but we did not clasp the epithet to our bosoms as a badge of honor. Unlike the people who, a quarter of a century later, pleaded guilty as charged and gloried in their shame. To put the matter another way, the term neoconservative or new conservative and neoconservative began to appear in certain journals nearly 40 years ago. They were applied to such writers, and then he names Robert Nisbet and other people, and your servant. When commentators and critics of that remote epoch entertained sentiments kindly in some degree towards such literate obscurance, they used the term new conservative, implying that misguided through such relatively youthful reactionaries might be. Still, they probably meant well and occasionally displayed glimmerings of sense. nay, that now and again such conservatives even made suggestions worth discussing, though perhaps accidents. As you can see, the text here has lots of strange translation errors, so bear with me if I hesitate on some of the words as I try to figure out part of them there. Such were the opinions of our friendly critics, but journalists and professors who thought less well of us pinned upon us the dreaded label of neoconservative, knowing us for symptoms of the recurrence, probably saying that wrong, of a loathsome plague called, or probably they just typed it wrong, of a loathsome plague called reaction, enemies of all progress, oppressors of the poor, either tools of the bloated capitalists or toadies of the feudal barons, simpletons enamored of the superstitions of the childhood of the race. The worst fears of these evangels uh, uh, of secular progress came to be realized. They were true prophets. For indeed, revived conservative doctrines were disseminated throughout the land by our malicious typewriters, and the American people were arrested for their march towards an early Zion. Fresh horde of dissenters, yet we scribbled conservatives as the beginning of at the beginning of the 1950s, or at least most of us did not eagerly accept the appellation New Conservative, nor yet that of Neoconservative. Most of us were merely styled ourselves conservatives, being well aware of that conservatism is nothing new. Others of our kind preferred to bear no dog tag. Presently, it came to pass that during the no, that is okay. Presently, it came to pass during the reign of King Lyndon of the Dealer that the media of opinion began to recognize the existence of a loose league of other persons whom we can call the new conservatives, so to speak. This fresh horde of dissenters from the holy liberalism were men and women of Manhattan, and for the most part of Jewish stock. Russell Kirk, and then this is just, yeah, like I said, they just like drop his biography in the middle of this for no reason. It's confusing the way the document is laid out. But he said chiefly they recruited from, so he's saying they're mainly from Jewish stock, although they also recruited from Protestant and Catholic auxiliaries. At one time or another, nearly all of them had professed to be radicals or ritualistic liberals that a long time ago in the case of some of their leaders. These are the neoconservatives so much praised or drubbed today. Mr. Irving Kristol and his associates accepted without much protest the neoconservative tag pinned upon them by their adversaries, such as Whigs and Tories during the 17th century had come to wear as badges of honor the derisive epithets thrust upon them by their enemies. Vials of scorn. Although I paid sorry, the way it's typed here is strange. Although I paid very close attention to the emerging of these late recruits to the conservative movement, I did welcome their appearance, perceiving that not a few among them were people of talent and energy, active in serious journalism and in certain universities, and giving promise of the rise of conservative or quasi-conservative opinion among the Jewish intelligentsia of New York in particular, a class previously given over to radicalism or disintegrated liberalism. Perhaps I expected too much of these Manhattan allies. So he's saying, okay, at first we had like a new breed of conservatives in the 50s, and they were people who were, they tried to give this, attach this new conservative or neoconservative label, but we kind of backed away from that. We didn't like it. However, there was another crop of conservatives that came after, and they tend to be disaffected liberals. See, let me know if you've heard this one before. They tend to be disaffected liberals, many of a Jewish origin, who are part of the Manhattan elite. And these people came in and they took up the mantle of neoconservatives. Guys like Irving Kristol and others, they didn't push it away. They embraced it. And he says here at first, Russell Kirk is saying, at first, I thought that these people could be good allies, right? Like, okay, yes, they used to be passionate leftists, in many cases, very radical leftists, at the very least, stalwart liberals, but they were very intelligent. They had connections in journalism. They seemed like people who would be able to move the ball forward. But maybe I was mistaken. Maybe I thought that this alliance could work when it really couldn't. and he's going to dive into that more in a second. But before he does, let's hear from today's sponsor. Hey guys, let me ask you a question. Are you being lied to? I mean, they tell you to max out your 401k and IRA, and then they make you beg for permission to use your own money. It's time to get the truth and discover a better way to grow and protect your money. Bank on Yourself is the proven retirement plan alternative that banks and Wall Street desperately hope you never hear about. It gives you guaranteed, predictable growth in retirement income. With Bank on Yourself, your plan doesn't go backwards when the market tumbles. Your principal and growth are locked in. It gives you tax-free retirement income. You'll know your tax rate in retirement, which is 0 under the current law. It protects you from the incoming tax tsunami. Gives you peace of mind. You'll know the minimum guaranteed value of your retirement savings on the day you plan to tap into them, and at every point along the way. You can get a free report that reveals how you can bank on yourself and enjoy tax-free retirement income, guaranteed growth, and control of your money. Just go to bankonyourself.com/Auron and get your free report. That's bankonyourself.com/Auron. bankonyourself.com/Auron. All right, so back to our speech from Russell Kirk here. He says, when the late Michael Harrington smote them hip and thigh, I was not taken aback. Such an assault was to be expected from a syndicalist. When Mr. Peter Steinfels, editor of Commonwealth, then poured the vials of scorn upon their devoted heads in a book entitled The Neoconservatives, I was puzzled that Joe Sobran, in the pages of National Review, found some substance in Steinfels' acerbic criticism. I encouraged Dr. Frank Anudza to write for my quarterly university Bulon a defense of these neoconservatives against Steinfels. So he's saying, I was shocked to find, he said, I expect some people to attack the neoconservatives, but I did not expect conservatives to do this. Guys like Joe Sobran, who's a paleoconservative. I did not, I was confused at first as to why they were leveling criticism. So I wanted to ultimately defend these new allies. Insufficiently capitalistic. Although one may trace the beginning of neoconservatism of the Manhattan sort back to the year of 1965, the ladies and gentlemen of the political sect did not loom large for me until the early years of the Reagan administration. I was mildly startled then in the 1980s when Mr. George Gilder, addressing the Heritage Foundation, declared emphatically that he was no neoconservatism. He found them insufficiently capitalistic and morally inferior to Mrs. Phyllis Schlafly. In short, I was prejudiced in favor of these prodigal sons, come home to a conservative patrimony that many had who have been denominated the neoconservatives. How earnestly they founded magazine upon magazine. How skillfully they insinuated themselves into the council of the Nixon and Reagan administrations. How very audaciously some of them a decade ago proclaimed their ability to alter the whole tone of the New York Times. That was there was a consummation devoutly to be wished, but it turned out that they're out to be a mere delusion, a delusionary hope of the neoconservatives. And and then there's like a 7 there for something remains of ungenerated. Yet their hubris in that instance notwithstanding, the neoconservatives certainly displayed enterprising talents in their early years. So he says, look, I felt like I needed to defend these guys. There were people who were telling me, I don't think they're conservative enough. I think they have another agenda. I don't think we should welcome them. But he's like, well, I felt like these people are coming back. They're coming back to the fold. They should be conservatives. And look, they're so good at writing these different publications and involving themselves in the administration. They must be allies. I mean, look at the energy they have in working their way into every aspect of the conservative movement. They must be on our side. For some persons who are called or who call themselves neoconservatives, my approbation is undiminished. Who would not welcome an alliance with such champions of truth as Pastor Neuhaus, or more prudent sociologists as the doctors Berger? Such undoubtable educators such as Diane Ravitch, such sound scholars as Nathan Glazer. Often such opponents of nihilism and fanatic ideology contend in the academic in the academy against bitter enemies who outnumber the neoconservative professors many times over. Let us sustain them. Yet, in general, the neoconservative group may not have made many friends nor influenced many people, despite talents for self publicizing. As Mr. Ben Hart, tongue somewhat in cheek, observed to me about the neoconservatives while we were arranging this lecture, there are there are only about three of them. They have no true political constituency, not even in Manhattan, or perhaps especially not in Manhattan. They have shown no great literary skill. I fear that not one book by a neoconservative will be read in the year 2000. Neoconservatives have tended, regrettably, to become a little sect, distrusted and reproached by what we may call mainline conservatives, who now and again declare that many of the conservatives chiefly place and uh, are seeking chiefly place and preferment. Incidentally, doubtless many of you present today, ladies and gentlemen, have observed that the address of certain eminent neoconservatives has been rejected by the people around Vice President Bush. And it appears to me that, for good or ill, President Bush will not be eager to obtain the services of this little sacred band, which has made itself exclusive and now finds itself excluded. You'll see that he is telling consistently, I think he's kind of directing towards George Bush at the time. Don't trust these neoconservatives. I don't know if he genuinely thought that George Bush would not embrace the neoconservatives, or if he's just kind of trying to give him a hint, like, of course you don't want to deal with these people, right, George? Right? You wouldn't want to do that. And obviously he will end up opposing George Bush later on. He will back Pat Buchanan in his run against George Bush. So we'll see that ultimately, he did not appreciate, I guess, the way that George Bush handled the neoconservatives, even after his speech here. Selfish and uninstructed, I offer you two specimens and the rejection of the neoconservatives that I encountered nowadays in many quarters. My first extract is from a letter recently received from a very distinguished historian in Pennsylvania. I have burned my bridges with most, not all, of the conservatives, and especially with the neoconservatives, who are selfish and uninstructed, maybe unconstructed was what he's, or maybe it is just uninstructed radicals and progressives, wishing to pour cement all over the country and make the world safe for democracy, well beyond the dreams of Wilson, he writes. A feeling for the land and for its conservation and for the strong modesty of a traditional patriotism, as distinct from nationalism, none of them has. So he's saying, look, these people, they're still progressives, they're still radicals. They have the same views. Yes, they're against communism now. They want to put worldwide democracy, but they still just want to basically, normalize the entire world, pour cement over the whole country. That's a great phrase. I really like that. Just kind of level it all and make it all just democracy everywhere. They're just as bad as Woodrow Wilson. They don't care about conservation of the land. They don't care. They're not true patriots. They just have this idea of overbearing nationalism. So even then, the critiques of neoconservatism and the recognition that it was going to destroy a lot of what conservatism had traditionally been was already a criticism that was being leveled at the neoconservative group. My second instance of the spreading distaste for neoconservatives comes from a well-known literary scholar. I would not be at all surprised to see the neocons jump ship if Dukakis is elected. They would be perfectly capable of making an accommodation with the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, he tells me. It is significant that when the neocons wish to damn any conservative who has appealed for a grant to a conservative foundation, they tell the officers of that foundation the conservative is fascist. I believe that the chief enemy of American conservatism has not been Marxists or even socialist liberals in the Democratic Party, but the neoconservatives who have sabotaged the movement from within and exploited it for their own selfish purposes. Remember, this is in 1988, guys. Okay, this is 1988, and he's already complaining, look, these people will switch parties the minute they think that they can get their agenda done with the other party. We've already seen this now after Donald Trump, right? All the neoconservatives jumped to the Democratic Party, or most of them jumped to the Democratic Party. He says the neocons cancel any actual conservatives by just calling those conservatives fascists, if that sounds familiar. He says, and ultimately, the biggest threat to the conservative movement, it's not these Marxists, it's not the Democrats, it's not the socialists, it's the neocons. They're destroying the party from within. They are already destroying everything that conservatives believe in from the inside. Simple old label. Now the strictures of the gentleman I have quoted cannot well apply to some of the better known people called neoconservatives, for there are among that group high-minded men and women of principle. Our difficulty here is very like that I encountered when I lectured a few months ago on the libertarians. The appellation neoconservative, like the appellation libertarian, is so widely employed and so variously as to seem to include people of radically opposing views. So Russell Kirk had exactly my problem with the phrase libertarian. It's the same problem I still have. I'm still telling libertarians now the same thing that Russell Kirk was telling them in 1988, and they still won't listen. What is a neoconservative really? He is a Harrington, and he is, as Harrington and Stifles saw him, a liberal who is opportunistically has turned his coat. Is he primarily a seeker after power and the main chance? Or is he a man who has new ideas about the defense of the permanent things? For my part, I wish that certain so-called neoconservatives whose views and lives I approve, like certain libertarians for whom I have a fellow feeling, would content themselves as I do to simply call with the simple old label conservative. So he's saying, look, conservatives are a very specific are a very different thing from neoconservative. So please be careful about using neoconservative. In fact, libertarians, if you could just call yourselves conservatives too, that would be great. If are you in for a defense of the permanent things, then just call yourself a conservative, because these neoconservatives, they are more opportunistic. They are just liberals who have found a moment to take control of the Republican Party and the conservative movement. They are turncoats who are only interested in power. This again, Russell Kirk, 1988. Be that as it may, I predict that within a few years, we will hear no more of the neoconservatives. Well, he got that one wrong. Some will have fallen away, and others will have been merged with the main current of American conservative movement, and yet others, I'm not sure how all that works with the mistyping there, will have been silenced by the tomb. After all, the leading neoconservatives are not new people. They have become old people already, as have myself. There was published in a recent number of commentary a charmingly naive essay in which it was argued that the children and grandchildren of the extant neoconservatives would come to form a sacred bond, calling themselves neoconservatives lifelong and ruling the American roost. This dream ignores the fact that things initially new do not long remain new. Everything ages, and yesteryear's novelty ceases to charm. So he's saying, yes, they're new, but not that new. Actually, they're becoming quite old. They're becoming part of the establishment. Some of them will just change their stripes, call themselves by a different name, and meld into the neoconservative, to just kind of make the party itself neoconservative. Others will maintain this title, but he says, I think ultimately the title neoconservative will basically lose its luster, which is definitely true for sure. Ignoring experience, self-proclaimed political elites do not long endure this democratic republic. But the neoconservatives prefer to ignore experience, a hard master. Benjamin Franklin says, those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it. As Santayana reminds us, deficient in historical understanding as in familiarity with human letters, most of the neoconservatives lack these long views and the apprehension of the human condition, which forms a basis for successful statecraft. Often clever, these neoconservatives are seldom wise. So he says, yeah, these guys, they think they're very smart, but they don't have a lot of understanding of history. They don't pay attention to the deeper things, the more important things. They just have the surface level intelligence. They think they're very clever. They might be very clever, but they're not very wise. They're usually not making wise decisions. Having dread the weird of the faction called the neoconservatives, I proceed to praise them. For despite the seeming harshness of the judgments I have uttered a few minutes ago, I have many sympathies with the neoconservatives and admiration for some of them. Permit me then to touch upon some of their achievements. The art of the possible. First, in a time when riotous students and urban mobs did very much as they pleased, in an era when the academy and the learned societies were dominated by radical doctrinaires, when the blunders of domestic and foreign of the Johnson administration enfeebled the nation, why at that juncture the neoconservatives came forward, proclaiming that politics is the art of the possible, and did their best in the case of sound sense. They drubbed sentimental liberalism and scorned radical fanaticism. In that hour, they maintained stoutly the rule of law and political prudence. So he says, look, okay, it's not all bad. There were some critical things when we were losing influence in the wider culture, when there was a lot of violence from roaming mobs and from the universities. Again, does any of this sound familiar? They were able to step into the breach and get some of this done. They were very practical in some of their aims at the time. Second, he says, we are in debt to the neoconservatives for their founding of several intelligent and serious journals, somewhat narrow in their scope and their readership and their circles of contributors, perhaps, but containing many valuable articles on public policy, education, and other major subjects of the day. These publications have helped to demonstrate that, after all, conservatives are not so stupid as John Stuart Mill fancied them to be. Third, in the realm of domestic politics, at least, the neoconservatives began discussions of practical alternatives to mere social drifting. They, or at least some of them, knowing that the national clock could not be turned back to the year 1928, endeavoring to frame public policies that would meet realistically the necessities of the concluding 3 decades of the 20th century. Fourth, in foreign policy, the neoconservatives have opposed manfully, or in the case of Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick, womanfully, the design of and the menace of the Soviet Union. They have been well aware of that America is not merely opposed to a national rival, but graver peril, combating an armed doctrine, as Burke said of the British resistance to the Jacobins 2 centuries ago. Sometimes true, they have been rash in their schemes of action, pursuing a fanciful democratic globalism rather than the national interest of the United States. On such occasions, I have tended to side with those moderate libertarians who set their faces against foreign entanglement. And not seldom, it has seemed, as some eminent neoconservatives mistook Tel Aviv for the capital of the United States, a position they have difficulty maintaining as matters drift in the Levant. Again, you can kind of see why Russell Kirk got canceled after this speech. Yet, by and large, I think they have helped to redeem America's foreign policy from the confusion into which it fell during and after the wars in Southeastern Asia. In this, they were to redress the balance in the conduct of foreign affairs. In a little while, nevertheless, I shall utter some misgivings about the possible long-term consequences of their understanding of the America's international undertakings. So he says, look, ultimately, the thing the neoconservatives understood that was correct is they hated the Soviet Union. They wanted to destroy the communists, and they understood that the empire that the communists were building was ideological. It wasn't just one of military might or geopolitical strength. And so he says, that's what they did well. Unfortunately, their foreign policy is not just about stopping that ideology. It was about building a democratic globalism. So they were also looking to globalize. Remember, most of these guys were Trotskyites. They were former Trotskyites. Their ideology was global socialism, and then their ideology just became global democracy, which is the same thing. And so, they understood, and he's pointing out that, yes, they understood the menace of communism, but they were kind of making their own very dangerous version of it, and they were wanting us to involve ourselves in all these wars. He specifically points out that, Israel is a place that they seem very obsessed with and often are putting those interests in front of the interests of the United States. And so while I think they were good on the Soviet Union and the foreign policy involved there, I don't think they were great for our foreign policy at the end of the day. And he says, and remember, this is the big break between the paleoconservatives and the neoconservatives was, at one point this alliance kind of existed because you needed to defeat the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union was done, the idea was, okay, we don't need this anymore. So we can move on, right? We don't need to have this global empire. We don't need to have this idea of this global democratic globalism, this ideological approach. We don't have to start wars, in other places just because we don't like the way their government runs. This was the break, right? And he's saying here, ultimately, I've been siding with the libertarians more than I've been siding with the neoconservatives because they understand that this continued intervention is not good for the country. A matter of judicious speculation. In short, the neoconservatives has exercised considerable intellectual influence, though not conspicuously in the academy, and have taken a vigorous hand in the decisions of the national government during an era when the conservative movement in this country needed reinforcements. Whether they can achieve much of the value in the future is a matter of judicious speculation, to which I will now proceed. Little while ago, I remarked that the neoconservatives are often clever but seldom wise. T.S. Eliot's lines from 77 Rock, I'm sure that's mistyped there, may be applied to them. There is wisdom we have lost in where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? In their publications, the neoconservatives thrust upon us a great deal of useful information, and obviously are possessed of considerable knowledge of the world around us. But in the understanding of the human condition and the apprehension of the accumulated wisdom of the civilization, they are painfully deficient. So he's saying, look, okay, these guys are smart. They understand some of the realities of the world around us, and they do provide valuable contributions, but they don't understand the human condition. There's something about our tradition and civilization that they do not grasp. Infatuated with ideology. An instance of this lack of wisdom in the neoconservatives' infatuation with ideology. Some of you, ladies and gentlemen, presently here may have heard some years ago my exchange on this very platform with Mr. Irving Kristol concerning ideology. He and various of his colleagues wished to persuade us to adopt an ideology of our own to set against Marxists and other totalist ideologies. Ideology, I venture to remind you, is political fanaticism. At best, it is the substance of slogans for real political thought. Ideologies animates, in George Orwell's phrase, the streamlined men who think in slogans and talk in bullets. So he's saying, look, they believe that we need an ideology to combat the Marxist ideology, that we need our own ideology. But he says, I don't like ideology. I think ideology has a deleterious effect on the country, on our politics, on our way of thinking. Ultimately, this is not a good way for us to pursue our aims. Over the years, I have written a good deal about the curse of ideological infatuation, so I do not propose today to digress at length on that grim subject. I refer you rather to the recently published collection of Dr. Gerhard Neinmeyer's essays entitled Aftersight and Foresight. In his essay, Ideas Have Roots, Professor Neinmeyer reproves Mr. Kristol for his unfortunate advocacy of a Republican ideology, and goes on to describe the unhappy infiltration of ideological illusions in American politics. So again, same thing I've been saying for a long time. I didn't get it out of nowhere, that we have a serious problem with ideology, and that ideological possession has gripped our nation and has distorted our view of politics, our view of what the nation is, of what a people should be, of how our country should run. This is why we get the propositional nation, right? Nation's not a people, it's not a tradition, it's not a way of life, it's not a religion. It's an abstract ideology. It's bullet points that I can put down and recite and yell whenever I'm at a rally. That's what I want. That's ideology, and he's railing against that. Role of Humpty Dumpty. Ideology is not confined to communists and fascists, Dr. Niemeyer writes. We too have our share of it, and it shows in our policies. All modern ideologies have the same irrational root, the permeation of politics with the millenarian idea of pseudo-religious character. The result is a dream world. Woodrow Wilson dreamed both of a world safe for democracy and of enduring peace, world safe from war. More recently, our national leaders have talked about creating a new society, a great society, and to that end, making the war against poverty, the war against hunger, creating a new man, making the world new as at the beginning, building a shining city on a hill. All of these presume that man could create himself, implying that he is not a creature dependent on God, but the master of his own soul and destiny. Civilization activities are given the character of salvation and thus stamped with a label of sacredness. So he says this neoconservative ideology is just as bad as the Marxist ideology or the fascist ideology because all of these things are progressive ideologies that want to remake man in their own image. They ignore God, they ignore truth, they ignore the roots of civilization. They think that people are infinitely malleable, and if we just control everything, then we can make a new man and a new civilization. Just it's amazing. It's amazing that they're calling this out again back in 1988. A very recent example of this puerile infatuation of the neoconservatives with new ideology or an American ideology is a very lengthy and highly pretentious article by Mr. Michael Novak in the fall of 1988, number of the interesting magazine, and then more mistyping of the actual magazine names, himself behind a formidable array of footnotes. Most of them are citations from his own book. Mr. Novak advocates ideology as an indispensable but secondary guide to social action. Unlike many neoconservatives, Mr. Novak does pay some respect to religion in his essay, conveniently ignoring the unpleasant fact that all ideologies are anti-religious or inverted religions. Very important line here. All ideologies are either anti-religious or inverted religions. We are living in a world that is full of anti-religious or themselves inverted religious ideologies that rules everything, right? That is our entire politics and our entire national identity at this point. But the reader may suspect uncomfortably that Mr. Novak's sentiments are much like those of the late Robert Kerr, long senator from Oklahoma, who was given to intoning from time to time, "God always has his arm around my shoulder." In his role of Humpty Dumpty, Novak presumes to redefine the world's ideology. He instructs us that ideology is a guiding vision of future social action. Words mean, of course, whatever Humpty Dumpty and Michael Novak wish them to mean. The vision stuff. In the light of this definition, one heartily endorses the offhand remarks of Vice President George Bush that he does not relish this vision stuff. Visionary politics, as Mr. Niemeyer emphasizes in the paragraph I quoted a few minutes ago, do not open our way to an earthly paradise. What is this ideology that Crystal and Novak would have us to embrace? Why the ideology of a term Mr. Novak has popularized, democratic capitalism? By vigorous advocacy for democratic capitalism, by doctrinaire attachment to that ideology, Mr. Crystal and Mr. Novak are saying, in effect, Marxism will be undone and the American people will be given a vision of social perfection. What a feeble reed they have put into one's head. Not caring to break a butterfly on the wheel, I offer you merely a very succinct refutation of the strange notion that the ideology called democratic capitalism can set our collective American steps aright. First of all, the phrase is a contradiction in terms. For capitalism is not democratic, nor should it be, nor can it be. The test of the market is not a matter of counting noses and soliciting votes. And the mark of capitalism is not the fallacy that one man is as good as another or maybe a little better, after large decisions by shrewd entrepreneurs and managers. Nor is there any egalitarianism in the distribution of rewards of a market economy. Second, capitalism is a word popularized by Karl Marx. It implies that the self-accumulation and enjoyment of capital is the sole purpose of our society, soon to be overthrown by the proletariat. Capitalism is represented as a complete system, moral, intellectual, and political, and economic, an ideology that has been devised by the greedy capitalists to serve as a false front for the enslaving of the workers of the world. Such is the Marxist argument. The Mrs. Crystal and Novak appear to be fulfilling Marx's prophecy by cobbling up such an ideology. So he says, look, Marx created this cartoonish idea of what Marxism is, or what capitalism is, right? And you are basically just adopting that cartoonish idea. You believe that capitalism is like a totalizing ideology that can define your morality, that can define your religion, define your politics, along with your economics. And he says that's just not the case. And amazingly, that is exactly what we've done now. Most American conservatives can't separate capitalism from the rest of their understanding. Many libertarians, especially, cannot do this. They don't understand capitalism as perhaps the best economic system and the one you should adopt. They understand as this totalizing ideology that should define your social relationships, your family relationships, your religion, your morals, your ethics, everything. He says you're turning capitalism into the very cartoonish ideology that Karl Marx tried to destroy, that he tried to denigrate when he created the term in the first place. The terrible simplifiers. Now, in truth, our society is not a capitalist system at all, but a complex cultural and social arrangement that comprehends religion, morals, and prescriptive political institutions, literary culture, a competitive economy, private property, and much more besides. It is not a system designed to secure and advance the interests of a great professor of great professors of capital goods unjustly acquired. Do Crystal and Novak in the role of I'm not sure how that all gets typed out there. Terrible simplifiers think that they will gain the affection of the peoples of the world by actually declaring Americans and their allies to be the very capitalist exploiters the Marxists have been denouncing all these years by promulgating an ideological manifesto that offers nothing better than a utopia of democratic creature comforts. So he says, look, our America's system is way more than capitalism. Saying we're just spreading capitalism and democracy, that's not enough. That's not America. That's part of America, but that is in no way the defining factors of who Americans are or what America is. You can't just export this ideology somewhere and then turn people into Americans. And by creating this incredibly materialistic utopian ideology, you are doing exactly what Marx warned people about. You are becoming the monster that Karl Marx was trying to falsely create when he was criticizing traditional society. As for the democratic aspect of this neoconservative ideology, the Constitution of the United States is not for export, as Daniel Borenstein puts it. Really important there. The Constitution of the United States is not for export. To expect that all of the world should and must adopt the peculiar political institutions of the United States, which often do not work very well at home, is to indulge in the most unrealistic of visions. Yet just that seems to be the hope and the expectation of many neoconservatives. Such naive doctrine led us into the wars in Indochina. The notion that we could establish or prop up in Vietnam a democracy that never existed anywhere in Southeast Asia. Such foreign policies are such stuff as dreams are made of, and yet they lead to the heaps of corpses of men who died in vain. We need to ask ourselves whether the neoconservative architects of international policy were very different from the foreign policy advisors of the surrounding Lyndon B. Johnson. So again, back in 1988, he's warning everybody, don't do this, okay? You can't spread the Constitution. It doesn't just apply to everybody. It's very specific to Americans. You can't just go to Vietnam or later Afghanistan and Iraq and just magically turn them into democratic nations. That's not how it works. In sitting on abstract democracy, let me make myself a little clearer in this matter by repeating here what I wrote some months ago in my review of Dr. Jean Kirkpatrick's 2 volumes of speeches and papers. Mrs. Kirkpatrick declares that the United States should pursue a foreign policy of advancing human rights rather than one of national interests. She tells us, in effect, that the only democratic governments are legitimate governments. That is the neoconservative ideological dogma. And not only is that the dogma, as soon as human rights became things like trans and gay rights, that's what we started spreading, right? That's what neoconservatives just pivoted to. They didn't care ultimately about the values attached. It was the ideology that mattered. Yet Ambassador Kirkpatrick remarks that we ought to get to reject the alliance of autocratic or authoritarian states, as distinguished from totalist regimes, which share with America the will to resist communism and the Soviet Union. So ought she not to base her argument for legitimacy upon the existence of constitutional or constitutional government or constitutional order, justice, and freedom, or representative government, or simply tolerable government, rather than insisting on an abstract democracy. So he says, look, if we're willing to ally ourselves with these other authoritarian states, if they'll fight the Soviet Union, then we probably shouldn't just say that like abstract democracy is our goal, because like we're obviously hypocrites. We clearly don't believe this. For the word democracy has come to resemble an old hat that everyone wears and nobody respects. As she observes herself, some of the most oppressive regimes in our world pretend to be democracies, and have not democracies often been unholy alliances between a successful demagogue and a greedy mob. If that doesn't beautiful, beautiful. Is the government of Saudi Arabia distinctly not democratic, less legitimate than the government of a typical Marxist People's Republic? Is the government of Israel, a garrison state, illegitimate because it excludes from a full civic participation 1/5 of its population on ethnic and religious grounds, scarcely a democratic principle of just government? So again, you can kind of see why he got he got canceled with this one, right? Not hard to read the tea leaves on how he got canceled with this one. A quasi religion. Most of the world never was satisfactorily democratic in the past. Sorry, I lost my place there for a moment. Most of the world never was satisfactorily democratic in the past, and is distinctly undemocratic today, and has no prospect of decent democracy in the future. Were the United States to insist upon the attainment of democracy plus capitalism by every nation state, which it has satisfactory relations, before long, its principal trading partner might be Switzerland. The United States cannot be forever unsettled. The United States cannot be forever unsettling the governments of client states or small countries or of allies on the ground that they are not, because they are not sufficiently democratic in obedience with the doctrines of Rousseau, or whenever they discriminate against somebody or other, or when they prefer traditional economies to full-blown abstract capitalism. One thinks of the aphorisms of Vietnam's Madame New: if you have the United States for a friend, you don't need any enemies. Successful foreign policy, like political success generally, is produced through the art of the possible, not through ideological rigidity. It will not go for the State Department to repeat like an incantation: democracy is good, all other governments are bad. So it says, look, lots of people aren't going to be democracies. That's just a fact of life. That's where we are, okay? So if you're going to have alliances, if you're going to do business, if you're going to do trade, if you're going to be in any kind of relation with other countries, and demand that they have to be democratic and they have to be capitalist and they have to adopt all of your gay rights stuff or all of your civil rights stuff or all of your women rights stuff, then you're going to have no allies. You're going to have no friends. You're going to have to basically conquer the world. It doesn't matter if the State Department goes around and says, everybody needs a democracy. Only democracy is good. That is not going to change the reality on the ground. You have to stop buying in to this ideology that you have to force democracy and capitalism in exactly the vein you like, and all of your human rights requirements and everything else on other countries. In short, I'm saying that a quasi-religion of democratic capitalism cannot do duty for immigration and right reason and prescriptive wisdom in domestic politics or in foreign relations. An ideology of democratic capitalism might be less maligned than an ideology of communism or National Socialism or syndicalism or anarchism, but it would be but it would not be much more intelligent or humane. So it's like, this is just an ideology. The thing you're pushing, this neoconservative democratic capitalism, this global empire of neoliberal ideology, you might not hate it as much as communism or National Socialism or whatever, but ultimately this is just as inhumane and it's just as ridiculous. You will have gathered, ladies and gentlemen, that I am disappointed, generally speaking, with the neoconservative faction. I had hoped that they would might bring lively imagination into the conservative camp. Instead, they have urged conservatives to engage in ideological sloganizing, the death of political imagination. Dull standardization. I had expected the neoconservatives to address themselves to the great social difficulties of the United States today, especially in the swelling growth of dismal urban proletariat, and the decay of the moral order. Instead, with some exceptions, their concern has been mainly with the gross national product and global wealth. They offer few alternatives to the alleged benefits of the welfare state, shrugging their shoulders, and the creed of most of them is no better than the latter day utilitarians. So he says, look, these neoconservatives, they don't care about the fact that we are, we're degrading our morals, that we're degrading our civic life, that the urban poor are, they're backsliding in their quality of life and in their character. All they care about is the GDP, right? They don't care about the condition of the United States. They don't care about the condition of its people. It's just line go up, line go up. Again, 1988, guys, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. I thought that the neoconservatives might become the champions of the diversity in the world. Instead, they aspire to bring about a world of uniform and dull standardization. Gonna read that one again. I thought that the neoconservatives might become the champions of diversity in the world. Instead, they aspire to bring about a world of uniformity and dull standardization. I hadn't even read this before I wrote the total state, but it's all right here. He got it. Russell Kirk knew. I didn't get this from him, but he knew. Americanized, industrialized, democratized, localized, and boring. They are cultural and economic imperialists, many of them. I have conjectured that the neoconservatives might be so many new brooms sweeping clean, that they set new standards of political rectitude and leaven healthily the lump of the stolid conservative interest. Instead, they have behaved rather as if they were a cadre of a political machine of a type all too frequently encountered in American political history, eager for place and preferment and power, skillful at intrigue, ready to exclude from office any persons who might not be counted upon as faithful to the neoconservative ideology. Often backstairs, they have seemed more eager to frustrate their allies than to confute with those presumptive adversaries. Sorry, got lost there. Presumptive adversaries, the liberals and radicals. The strategy of Volpone or Sir Giles Overreach, nonetheless, they prove vain in the long run. So it is coming to pass nowadays with the neoconservatives. So all they care about is power. All they care about is seizing control of the institutions. All they care about is working their way into these different publications and these different positions. They don't care about the people themselves. They are willing to backstab everybody else in the movement to get to where they want to be. They'll cancel other people. They'll lie about other people. They'll do anything they can to undermine other conservatives as long as it means elevating their interests. Clever creatures. Do I then write Ichabod upon the lot of them? Nay, not so. Among them, as I mentioned earlier, are men and women who have risen to superior to the foibles and fallacies that have marred the neoconservative clique generally, and would be a great pity for the American nation to lose the talents of such people. And whatever blunders the neoconservatives have made from time to time, all the same, they have stirred up some intellectual activity among conservatives generally, not an easy thing to do. In the Wall Street Journal on August 22nd, 1988, Irving Kristol expressed his concern as to whether George Bush has the motivation to learn anything, and disparaged managerial skills in government. He urged the appointment of cabinet posts of superior academics, presumably of the crystal kidney. For the real political talent, Mr. Kristol wrote in a revealing passage, are quick-witted, articulateness, a clear sense of one's ideological agenda, and the devious routes necessary for its enactment. Machiavelli. Such have been the talents of the neoconservatives in Washington during the last 8 years. Clever creatures, glib, committed to an ideology, and devious at attaining their objective. The 7 cardinal virtues go unmentioned by Mr. Kristol. The virtue of prudence, according to both Plato and Burke, is the virtue most needed in the statesman. Where is the wisdom we have lost in the knowledge, neoconservatives? Where is the knowledge we have lost in the information? Playing the comic role. Mr. Bush, not known, not grow, Mr. Bush, not grown up in the backbiting ideological jungle of New York City, seems unlikely to accept Mr. Crystal's counsel of deviousness. For Mr. Bush is no ideologue and no intellectual, praise be. Rather, he is, as Crystal writes, a fine gentleman of good breeding, a true patriot, an experienced, reliable, and trustworthy public servant. Later on in the article, in the same article, incidentally, Mr. Crystal makes it clear, though, that he is no respecter of fine gentlemen. He commends Mrs. Thatcher for having in her cabinet none of the traditional aristocratic coloration, and rejoices that the conservative majority in the House of Commons has fewer members who have gone to Eton or Harrow, Oxford, or Cambridge. It is a reasonable presumption that Mr. Crystal and certain of his colleagues would prefer to install in the White House some person, not at all a fine gentleman, who might be deviously manipulated by neoconservative ideology. Mr. Bush has far too much practical experience of federal office to be so managed by the first-class academic brain trust that Mr. Crystal desires to establish in the White House. In politics, the professor always plays the comic role, Nietzsche wrote. It is coming to pass that the neoconservatives, of whose guiding vision the Bush people are healthily skeptical. So he's saying, look, the neoconservatives, they don't want aristocrats, they don't want gentlemen, they don't want statesmen, they want hardcore ideologues. They want people like themselves. They want clever academics, professors. They want people who are going to be ruthless and Machiavellian. They don't want people who have an established role in society. They don't want any attachment to the old world. They want, very, very brash, very quick-witted, very conniving people. And if they can't get rid of George Bush, they would prefer someone else would be in there so they can manipulate him instead. Again, I think he's buttering up George Bush here. He wants to be heard by George Bush and have his ideas stay with George Bush. But he's saying basically, they would replace you if they could with somebody who is easier to manipulate. No promise for neoliberalism. Do I think what with my moderate comments in this series of 4 lectures on the cultural conservatives, the libertarians, popular conservatism, and the neoconservatives, that the conservative movement near the end of the year 1988 is in the they must have, unless I just don't know that word and then mistyped that one. Yellow leaf, a more cognaries of warring factions, doomed to early dissolution as a political force. Not at all. Already, despite the complexion of the majority in the Congress, the conservatives are dominant in the country. The Democratic candidates for office now find it necessary nationally to pretend to be conservative. A number of Democratic aspirants to office actually have turned conservative, no longer in their walk of the promise of neoliberalism. On the contrary, during the next 4 years, we will benefit as people, I think, from the prudent conservative administration that has gained confidence and practical abilities from the 8 years of Mr. Reagan's success. It will not be a neoconservative administration, yet neither will it be an administration from which honest neoconservatives are excluded. Able cultural conservatives and sensible libertarians and plain mainstream conservatives, conservatively minded politicians will have their place in such administration. Let us pray that conservative movement of the 1990s will resemble Cicero's optimates, the party of all good men. Some of us, once upon a time, had fixed lifelong in our brains by the standard exercises in typewriting manuals Cicero's exhortation. Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party. This day I do similarly exhort you, ladies and gentlemen, yea, even the publicans, sinners, and neoconservatives in your midst. So obviously he's trying to say, I don't want you to become a neoconservative administration. We need to have a practical administration going forward. We need people of all faith from these different sides to come together in something that's actually going to help the country and isn't just going to pursue these abstract ideological goals of this particular wing inside the Conservative Party. And obviously he's really buttering up George Bush because he wants him to, listen. Let's just say this: Donald Trump is not the first guy that people had to appeal to, right? A lot of people will say, "Oh, well, people just suck up to Trump to get him to listen to what they're doing." Well, it's not the first president that they've had to do that with. That was happening with George Bush as well. So obviously, that's what Russell Kirk is trying to do here at the end of the speech. So that's a whole speech, guys. That's the end of it there. Again, lots of controversial stuff in there. Lots of stuff that will easily get you canceled back then in 1988 and will still get you canceled today. And ultimately, Russell Kirk did it in a backing Pat Buchanan for this reason, because George Bush did not listen to him. And he felt like he needed to break from what the conservative movement and to some degree had become. So just a very interesting piece, a lot of wisdom in there, a lot of interesting analysis on how power works and what's happening to the movement. And the fact that this is just written so many decades ago, and every word, without the references to particular, people of that day, would pretty much work for our exact current political situation, really says something, right? I think it's a very interesting and important thing for us to remember. And that's why I wanted to read it in its entirety. I know it's long. I know, there's mistypes in there because this is off the Heritage Foundation's website. I promise I didn't do this. And I stumbled a few times, but I'm glad you stuck with me because I really do think it's important that we recognize that this has been going on for a long time. These opinions are not new. The issues we're facing in 2025 were just as apparent to Russell Kirk back then. And so they tried to ruin him for it, for acknowledging this. So we need to recognize the same amount of power is going to be dropped on your head when you try to push back of what has happened to the conservative movement here, and why neoconservatism is ultimately very bad for America. All right, guys, let's go to the questions of the people here real quick. Tiny Stupid Demon says, FYI, there is a correctly formatted PDF version of this in a website called Policy Archive. Just search for the on the title. Okay, great. Thank you. I was not able to find that. I tried to, there's a PDF function here, but when you clicked it, it just said the link was broken. At first, I only found this on the Internet Archive initially, and then I was able to track down the original posting, at least on the Heritage Foundation. But it's good to know that there's a correctly produced version there. So if people want to get that, you can head to Policy Archive, it looks like. He also says, also, this is fire. Yeah, no, it's an amazing speech. It's like I said, he pulls no punches. He points to a lot of problems that we're still dealing with today. And I think it's just as timely now as it was when it was delivered. Thuggo says human rights are an anti-religion. Yep, that's basically what he's laying out here, is like this just becomes a replacement for a religion. It's the abstraction of what should be religious principles into something that becomes this totalizing ideology. And because it's not connected to something true and powerful and eternal like a religion, it becomes very dangerous very quickly. Based Hillbilly says, ironically, the centrist state-worshipping big government expansionist ex-Marxist neocons are very ideologically similar to the actual fascists. Yes, and there's a larger discussion to have on this, but there's a reason that all of these ideologies, whatever they are in name, are kind of converging on this like quasi-fascist communist hybrid, right? Like there's a reason that states are all arriving at this. There's the China convergence, as NS Lyons calls it, is occurring for a reason, right? And so yes, in some sense, these guys are ironically aping the fascism they're so worried about. But in a way, it actually makes sense because really these guys were Trotskyites who recognized they needed a totalizing ideology either way. Now, theirs is not fascist in the sense that they want to globalize it. Fascism, at least in its really theoretical term, is a ideology of nations, as where this is a globalizing one. But either way, they need the total state, right? At the end, everyone is arriving at the total state, which I think is very scary, but I think also is predictable given the geopolitical realities and the realities of power that we're facing in the world today. Scale has driven everyone to the total state, and we've all got ideological reasons and excuses to why our version's better and ours is okay, but we are all arriving at the same destination, just like the neoconservatives were. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for coming by. As always, if this is your first time on the channel, you need to click subscribe on YouTube, the bell notifications, all that stuff, so you know when we go live. If you want to get these podcasts as or if you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And when you do, if you leave a rating or review, it really helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.